extraordinary power allowed Napoleon to reveal the whole wickedness of the human will. Arthur Schopenhauer didn't have a high opinion of mankind. Generally, we're a corrupt, weak, egotistic, immoral bunch. He called our civilized world a masquerade, where each man puts on a mask to hide the fact that dishonesty and avarice are the true passions which rule his heart. Certainly, one dons the mask of justice, which he has borrowed from the lawyer, merely to beat vigorously upon another. Still another has for the same purpose chosen the public welfare and patriotism, and a third, religion or religious purity. And the greatest mask that civilization provides is to hide our beastly nature. The human being is at bottom a wild, horrible animal. Man is not inferior in cruelty and pitilessness to a tiger or hyena. Schopenhauer's misanthropic worldview was not just based on careless cynicism, it's supported by his philosophy. For Schopenhauer, the entire world is a wicked place. One huge struggle for existence. Plants fight each other for sunlight. The rabbit eats the plants. Wild dogs, in turn, hunt the rabbits. And the wild dogs are devoured by wolves. Human history, too, is one long succession of conflict, war, suffering, and pain. And some humans are better at inflicting suffering than others. And perhaps none in modern history, at least in Schopenhauer's time, was so good at it as Napoleon Bonaparte. Schopenhauer didn't write much about Napoleon, which is our first clue as to his opinion of the man. Because Schopenhauer was alive during Napoleon's time, and in many ways, Napoleon personally influenced his life. It was because of Napoleon's quote-unquote liberation of precious Italian artworks that Schopenhauer could see masterpieces of art such as the Laocoon, the Apollo Belvedere, the Venus of Medici, and the Dying Gladiator in Paris. Of course, General Bonaparte had stolen these artworks from the Vatican in his conquest of Italy and had them relocated to the Louvre. Just at that time, the Schopenhauer family was visiting Paris. His impressions of these artworks informed much of his later philosophy of aesthetics. And Napoleon's conquest of Europe also affected Schopenhauer's personal life. For example, when he had to flee Berlin in 1813, fearing military conscription. There is even record of Schopenhauer catching a glimpse of Napoleon. It happened in 1804, when Napoleon, back then first consul of France but soon to be self-crowned emperor, visited a theater production in Paris, at which 15-year-old Schopenhauer was also present. He wrote in his travel diary, "The first consul was there. I was seated so that I was able to see him well during the entire performance." Curiously enough, for someone who would later in life write an essay dedicated to the art of physiognomy, Schopenhauer did not record his impressions of Napoleon's face. Napoleon is a titan of history, and Schopenhauer stands in extremely close historical proximity with the man. Artists, writers, philosophers, and of course historians were all obsessed with the phenomenon of Napoleon, devoting entire books to his politics, influence, and purpose in history. Yet, Schopenhauer is remarkably silent. Why? Schopenhauer remained unimpressed with the emperor throughout his entire life. His name is not mentioned in his main philosophy. Instead, we need to look at the essays that he wrote at the very end of his life. Napoleon is mentioned by name in an essay on human nature, and Schopenhauer, as you might guess, doesn't paint a flattering picture. Schopenhauer's view on Napoleon is remarkably simple. Napoleon is not a unique historical figure at all. There have been countless Napoleons, and you, dear viewer, are also a Napoleon. What do we mean by this? Let's take a deeper look. In Schopenhauer's view, humans are violent, despicable creatures, ruled by egoism and self-interest, with little regard for their fellow man. The only difference is that Napoleon was born with the right set of talents in the right circumstances to actually act upon his wicked impulses. We keep our beastly nature hidden from our fellow man, largely because society forces us to walk in line and behave ourselves. But we shouldn't kid ourselves and look at civilized life and then infer that because humans act like good people sometimes, that they are, deep down, actually good people. Or does the reader actually suppose that there are no people in the world as bad as Robespierre, Napoleon, or other murderers? Does he fail to see that there are many who would act like them, if only they could? We all have a little Napoleon in us. It's just that Napoleon was born with a military genius, intelligence, and ambition to actually act upon his desires. So Napoleon is special because of his talents and ambition, but he is not unique. In fact, Schopenhauer believes that nothing in history is really unique at all. He likes to use the Latin phrase eadem sed aliter to refer to history. The same, but different. This is a shot at Hegel, for whom history was a force of philosophical importance. For Schopenhauer, not so much. History is simply an indefinite cycle of human bloodlust upon human bloodlust. War after war, political scheme after political scheme. Whether it's Napoleon at the helm of an army or Alexander, makes very little difference. They are both manifestations of the will to life, that horrible metaphysical force underpinning all of reality and seeking constantly to affirm itself by inflicting suffering. In the case of extraordinary individuals like Alexander or Napoleon, they simply show the reality of human nature in all its horrible nakedness. They show us what monstrosities the human race is capable of if power falls into the hands of the ambitious and the ruthless. Unspeakable misery, that is the world's aim and purpose, and it is an aim and purpose which the appearance of Napoleon did much to assist. Napoleon is only an enormous mirror of the will to life. But lest we pass judgment onto Napoleon, remember that for Schopenhauer, most people are actually just as bad as him. Napoleon was not really worse than many, not to say most, men. He was possessed of the very ordinary egoism that seeks its welfare at the expense of others. What distinguished him was merely the greater power he had of satisfying his will, and greater intelligence, reason, and courage, added to which chance gave him a favorable scope for his operations. By means of all this, he did for his egoism what 1,000 other men would like to do for theirs, but cannot. Every feeble lad who by little acts of villainy gains a small advantage for himself by putting others to some disadvantage, although it may be equally small, is just as bad as Napoleon. So, is there anything positive to say about Napoleon? There is one thing that Napoleon can help us do, in Schopenhauer's view, and that is make us reflect upon our own bad impulses. When we consider the countless dead at Borodino, Waterloo, Marengo, Austerlitz, and the like, it should move us to reflect on the sorry state of human nature and inspire us to act more compassionate to our fellow man, to act more kindly to one another. In Schopenhauer's vocabulary, to turn away from the will to life, which is based on egoism and self-aggrandizement, and embrace an attitude of compassion towards our fellow man, or fellow sufferers, as Schopenhauer puts it. In Schopenhauer's philosophy, there is no difference between the person who inflicts the suffering and the person who undergoes the suffering. The difference between individuals, between you and me, is only phenomenal, it's only surface level. Beyond this material reality lies the world of will, in which all is one, and the difference between Napoleon and a fallen Austrian soldier at Marengo disappears. It is the folly of human nature to not realize this fundamental fact about reality, and we persist in putting others down to our benefit without realizing that we are actually hurting ourselves. But if there is one saving grace about human nature, it is our capacity for compassion. And it's compassion that allows us to peek behind the veil of illusion that would tell us there is a me and a you. And it's true compassion, through the experience of feeling the pain of other people, that we realize that perhaps there's not such a big difference between me and you, after all, that we are all one and the same. The pity inspired by the sight of a battlefield littered with the dead is proof of this. If we did not have a shared origin, such a feeling would simply not exist. And even the pitiless, ambitious Napoleon was once moved to tears. In a famous anecdote, Napoleon once happened upon a dog licking the face of his dead master when inspecting a battlefield. This soldier, I realized, must have had friends at home and in his regiment, yet he lay there deserted by all except his dog. I looked on, unmoved, at battles which decided the future of nations. Tearless, I had given orders which brought death to thousands. And yet here I was, stirred, profoundly stirred to tears. And by what? By the grief of one dog. If we venture into Schopenhauer's philosophy and view of humanity, we arrive at a dark, hopeless abyss, filled with pitiless monsters, guided by horrible, violent impulses to satisfy their own greed, ambition, and bloodlust. And Napoleon was, in Schopenhauer's view, definitely one of the greatest monsters that ever graced the earth. But if we are forced to find a glimmer of hope, anything at all to give us some solace or consolation, then it would be that amidst all the suffering caused by the Emperor, we are forced to confront our own dark side. Take a look in the mirror, reflect on our despicable human nature, and be inspired to do better. Thank you for watching.